It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a small town. The sun was shining, and the streets were calm. An elderly black woman, known in her neighborhood for her kindness and warm smile, was out running errands. She had just finished shopping at the local grocery store, carrying a few bags of essentials. She was tired but content, looking forward to getting home and resting her feet. As she walked out of the store, she noticed a police car parked near the entrance. She didn't think much of it and continued toward the bus stop. But before she could take more than a few steps, an officer approached her. He was young, with a stern expression on his face. He asked her to stop and put her bags down. Confused, she complied, wondering what was going on. The officer began questioning her, his tone sharp and accusatory. He claimed that a store employee had reported her for shoplifting. The woman was stunned. She had paid for everything in her bags and had the receipt to prove it. She tried to explain, but the officer cut her off, insisting she come with him to the station for further questioning. People nearby started to notice the commotion. Some stopped to watch, while others quickly walked away, not wanting to get involved. The woman, though shaken, remained calm. She knew she had done nothing wrong and trusted that the truth would come out. But as the officer handcuffed her and led her to the police car, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of injustice. She had lived in this town for decades, raised her family here, and never once had she been treated like this. The ride to the station was silent. The woman sat in the back of the car, her hands cuffed, staring out the window. She thought about her son, a hardworking man who had always stood up for what was right. She knew he would be furious when he found out what had happened. But she also knew he would handle it the right way. He always did. At the station, the woman was processed like a common criminal. Her belongings were taken, and she was placed in a holding cell. The officers on duty barely looked at her, treating her as if she were already guilty. She sat on the cold bench, her mind racing. How could this be happening? She had always taught her children to respect the law, to believe in fairness. But now, she was starting to doubt everything she had believed in. Meanwhile, her son was at work when he got the call. It was from a neighbor who had witnessed the arrest. The neighbor was frantic, explaining what had happened and urging him to get to the station as soon as possible. The son's heart sank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed so much for her family, was being treated like a criminal. He dropped everything and rushed to the station, his mind filled with a mix of anger and worry. When he arrived, he demanded to see his mother. The officers at the front desk were hesitant at first, but the son's determination was undeniable. He wasn't going to leave until he got answers. Finally, they allowed him to see her. The moment he laid eyes on his mother, sitting in that cold cell, his heart broke. But he also felt a surge of resolve. He was going to make this right, no matter what it took. The son asked for an explanation. Why had his mother been arrested? What evidence did they have? The officers struggled to give a clear answer. They mentioned the shoplifting report but couldn't provide any concrete proof. The son's frustration grew. He knew his mother would never steal, and he wasn't going to let this slide. He demanded to speak to the officer who had made the arrest. When the young officer arrived, the son confronted him. His tone was firm but respectful. He asked for the facts, for any evidence that justified his mother's arrest. The officer, now visibly uncomfortable, admitted that they had acted on a tip from a store employee but hadn't verified the claim. The son's eyes narrowed. He pointed out that his mother had the receipt for her purchases, proving her innocence. The officer hesitated, realizing his mistake. The son didn't stop there. He demanded an apology, not just for his mother but for the way she had been treated. He made it clear that this kind of behavior was unacceptable and that he would take further action if necessary. The officers, now realizing the gravity of the situation, began to backtrack. They released the woman from the cell and returned her belongings. But the damage had already been done. As the woman and her son left the station, she felt a mix of relief and sadness. She was grateful for her son's support but couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation. She had always believed in the goodness of people, but this experience had shaken her faith. Her son, sensing her distress, reassured her. He promised that he would make sure this didn't happen again, not just to her but to anyone else in their community. The ride home was quiet, but the son's mind was racing. He knew this wasn't the end. He was going to hold those responsible accountable and make sure that no one else had to go through what his mother had. As they pulled into their driveway, he made a silent vow. He was going to fight for justice, not just for his family but for everyone who had ever been wronged. The next morning, the elderly woman woke up feeling heavy. The events of the previous day weighed on her like a stone. She had always been a strong woman, someone who faced challenges with grace and resilience. But this was different. This wasn't just about her, it was about something bigger. She couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened to her was part of a larger problem, one that affected many others like her. Her son, on the other hand, was already up and moving. He had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. He knew he couldn't let this go. His mother's arrest wasn't just a mistake, it was a reflection of a system that often failed people who looked like them. He was determined to make sure this didn't happen again, not to his mother, not to anyone. After breakfast, the son sat down with his mother and asked her how she was feeling. She sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she held her cup of tea. "I'm okay," she said softly, though her eyes told a different story. "But I keep thinking, what if I hadn't had the receipt? What if no one had been there to speak up for me?" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her hands. Her son reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. "Mom, you don't have to worry about that. I'm here, and I'm not going to let this go. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." His voice was steady, filled with determination. The woman looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears. She nodded, trusting him completely. The son spent the rest of the morning making calls. He contacted a local lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with a reputation for taking on tough cases, listened carefully as the son explained what had happened. By the end of the call, the lawyer agreed to meet with them later that day. When they arrived at the lawyer's office, they were greeted warmly. The lawyer, a kind but no-nonsense man, sat them down and asked them to recount the events in detail. The woman hesitated at first, still feeling the sting of humiliation, but her son encouraged her to speak. As she told her story, the lawyer listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When she finished, the lawyer leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "What happened to you was wrong," he said firmly. "You were treated unfairly, and we need to make sure those responsible are held accountable. But more than that, we need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." He explained that they could file a formal complaint against the police department and potentially pursue a lawsuit. He also suggested reaching out to local community leaders and organizations to bring attention to the issue. The son nodded, feeling a sense of relief. He had been worried that no one would take their case seriously, but the lawyer's confidence gave him hope. The woman, though still nervous, felt a small spark of determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for her community. Over the next few days, the son and his mother worked closely with the lawyer. They gathered all the evidence they could, including the receipt from the grocery store and statements from witnesses who had seen the arrest. The lawyer also requested footage from the store's security cameras, which clearly showed the woman paying for her items and leaving the store without any issues. As they prepared their case, the son also reached out to local community leaders. He explained what had happened and asked for their support. Many were shocked and outraged, promising to stand by them. One leader, a well-respected pastor in the community, offered to organize a meeting to discuss the issue and plan their next steps. The meeting took place at the local community center. Dozens of people showed up, eager to hear what had happened and how they could help. The son stood at the front of the room, his mother sitting quietly beside him. He spoke passionately, recounting the events of that day and emphasizing the need for change. "This isn't just about my mother," he said, his voice strong and clear. "This is about all of us. We deserve to be treated with respect and fairness, no matter who we are or where we come from." The crowd erupted in applause, their support unwavering. The pastor stood up and addressed the room, urging everyone to come together and demand justice. "We cannot let this go," he said. "We must stand up for what is right and make sure that no one else has to endure what our sister here has endured." By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. They would hold a peaceful protest outside the police station, demanding accountability and transparency. They would also reach out to local media to bring attention to the issue. The son felt a surge of hope. For the first time since the incident, he felt like they were making progress. The next morning, the son and his mother stood outside the police station, surrounded by dozens of supporters. They held signs that read, "Justice for all" and "End racial profiling." The atmosphere was tense but peaceful. The son stepped forward and addressed the crowd, his voice steady and strong. "We are here today to demand justice," he said. "We are here to say that what happened to my mother was wrong, and we will not stand for it." As he spoke, a group of officers emerged from the station. Among them was the young officer who had made the arrest. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the crowd. The son locked eyes with him, his gaze unwavering. "We are not here to cause trouble," he continued. "We are here to demand accountability. We are here to demand change." The officers listened, their expressions unreadable. The young officer stepped forward, his voice trembling as he spoke. I made a mistake," he admitted. "I acted on a report without verifying the facts. I'm sorry." The crowd murmured, some nodding in approval, others still skeptical. The son took a deep breath. "An apology is a start," he said. "But it's not enough. We need to see real change. We need to know that this won't happen again." The officers nodded, promising to review their procedures and work with the community to address their concerns. As the protest came to an end, the son felt a sense of accomplishment. They had taken a stand, and people had listened. But he knew this was just the beginning. There was still a long road ahead, and the fight for justice was far from over. The protest outside the police station had made waves in the small town. News of the elderly woman's wrongful arrest and the community's response spread quickly. Local media picked up the story, and soon, it was the talk of the town. People who had never paid much attention to issues of racial profiling or police accountability were now discussing it openly. The son's efforts to bring attention to the issue were working, but he knew this was only the beginning. The day after the protest, the son and his mother sat in their living room, watching the local news. The story was the lead segment, with footage of the protest and interviews with community members. The woman watched quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She still felt a mix of emotions, relief that people were listening, but also a lingering sense of unease. She turned to her son and said, "I never wanted any of this attention. I just wanted to live my life in peace." Her son nodded, understanding her feelings. "I know, Mom," he said gently. "But sometimes, we have to speak up, not just for ourselves but for others who might not have a voice. What happened to you wasn't right, and we can't let it go unnoticed." The woman sighed but didn't argue. She trusted her son and knew he was doing what he thought was best. Still, she couldn't help but worry about what might come next. The attention was overwhelming, and she wasn't sure she was ready for it. Meanwhile, the police department was feeling the pressure. The chief of police, a seasoned officer with decades of experience, called an emergency meeting with his staff. He knew the department's reputation was on the line, and he couldn't afford to ignore the community's concerns. At the meeting, he addressed the officers, his tone stern but fair. "We made a mistake," he said. "And now, we have to own up to it. We need to do better, not just for the community but for ourselves." The young officer who had made the arrest sat quietly, his head down. He had been reprimanded and placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. He knew he had messed up, but he also felt like he was being made a scapegoat. He wanted to explain himself, to say that he was just doing his job, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The damage was done. As the days passed, the son continued to work with the lawyer and community leaders to push for change. They drafted a formal complaint against the police department, outlining the incident and demanding accountability. They also called for mandatory training on racial bias and de-escalation techniques for all officers. The lawyer assured them that these were reasonable demands and that they had a strong case. The son also reached out to other families in the community who had experienced similar incidents. Many were hesitant to come forward, fearing retaliation or not wanting to relive the trauma. But with the son's encouragement, a few agreed to share their stories. Their experiences were eerily similar, being targeted, treated unfairly, and left feeling powerless. The son realized that his mother's case was just one of many, and it only strengthened his resolve to keep fighting. One evening, the son received a call from a local journalist. She had been following the story and wanted to do a deeper dive into the issue. She asked if she could interview him and his mother for a feature article. The son hesitated at first, unsure if his mother would be comfortable with it. But when he asked her, she surprised him by agreeing. "If it helps others, then I'll do it," she said simply. The interview took place at their home a few days later. The journalist was kind and respectful, putting the woman at ease. She asked about the incident, how it had affected them, and what they hoped to achieve. The woman spoke from the heart, her voice steady but emotional. "I've lived in this town my whole life," she said. "I've always tried to do right by people. But what happened to me, it made me feel like I didn't matter. Like I was invisible. And I don't want anyone else to feel that way." The son also spoke, sharing his perspective and his determination to create change. "This isn't just about my mother," he said. "It's about all of us. We deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who we are. And if we don't stand up for that, who will?" The article was published a week later, and it had a profound impact. It humanized the issue, putting faces and names to the statistics. Readers were moved by the woman's story and inspired by her son's determination. The article also highlighted the broader issue of racial profiling and police accountability, sparking conversations across the community. The police department, feeling the pressure from both the community and the media, announced a series of reforms. They committed to implementing mandatory bias training, improving their complaint process, and working more closely with community leaders. The chief of police even reached out to the son and his mother, inviting them to meet and discuss their concerns. The meeting took place at the police station, with the son, his mother, the lawyer, and several community leaders in attendance. The chief listened carefully as they shared their experiences and suggestions. He acknowledged the department's shortcomings and promised to do better. "We can't change the past," he said. "But we can learn from it and make sure it doesn't happen again." The son appreciated the chief's willingness to listen, but he also knew that action spoke louder than words. He made it clear that they would be watching closely to ensure the department followed through on its promises. "We're not going away," he said. "We're going to hold you accountable, not just for us but for the entire community." As they left the meeting, the woman felt a sense of cautious optimism. She was proud of her son and grateful for the support they had received. But she also knew that real change would take time. She turned to her son and said, you've done so much already. I just hope it's enough." Her son smiled and put an arm around her shoulders. "It's a start, Mom," he said. "And as long as we keep fighting, we'll get there." The meeting with the police chief marked a turning point, but the son knew that the real work was just beginning. Promises were one thing, but actions were what truly mattered. He and his mother, along with their lawyer and community leaders, decided to form a coalition to ensure that the police department followed through on its commitments. They called it the Community Accountability Initiative, and its mission was simple: to advocate for transparency, fairness, and justice in law enforcement. The coalition held its first meeting at the local community center. The room was packed with people from all walks of life: parents, students, business owners, and activists. The son stood at the front, addressing the crowd with the same passion and determination that had driven him from the start. "This isn't just about one incident," he said. "It's about making sure that everyone in our community feels safe and respected. We're here to hold our leaders accountable and to demand change." The crowd erupted in applause, their energy palpable. People shared their own stories, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. The atmosphere was one of unity and resolve. For the first time in a long time, the community felt like they had a voice, and they were determined to use it. The coalition quickly got to work. They organized workshops to educate people about their rights when interacting with law enforcement. They also created a hotline for reporting incidents of misconduct or bias, ensuring that people had a safe and confidential way to speak up. The son and his mother became the faces of the movement, their story serving as a powerful reminder of why this work was so important. Meanwhile, the police department began rolling out its reforms. Officers attended mandatory training sessions on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. The department also established a community advisory board, which included members of the coalition, to provide input and oversight. The chief of police made a point of attending community events, listening to people's concerns, and building trust. The son was cautiously optimistic. He appreciated the efforts being made, but he also knew that systemic change didn't happen overnight. He made it a point to stay involved, attending meetings and keeping the pressure on. His mother, though still hesitant about the spotlight, supported him every step of the way. She was proud of what he was doing, even if it made her a little nervous. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, the woman turned to her son and said, "I never imagined any of this would happen. I just wanted to live my life quietly. But now I feel like we're part of something bigger." Her son smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "We are, Mom. And it's because of you. Your strength, your courage, it's inspired so many people. You've shown them that it's possible to stand up and make a difference." The woman nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. She still didn't see herself as a hero, but she was starting to understand the impact her story had had. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the community, about justice, about hope. As the weeks passed, the coalition's efforts began to bear fruit. The hotline received dozens of calls, many of which led to investigations and policy changes. The workshops were well attended, and people felt more empowered than ever. The police department, while still far from perfect, was making strides in rebuilding trust with the community. But not everyone was happy about the changes. Some officers resisted the new training, grumbling about political correctness and overreach. A few even tried to undermine the coalition's efforts, spreading rumors and misinformation. The son knew that change wouldn't come without pushback, but he refused to be deterred. He had come too far to let a few naysayers stop him. One day, the son received a call from a young man in the community. He had been stopped by the police while walking home from work and felt he had been treated unfairly. He had heard about the coalition and wanted to know if they could help. The son listened carefully, his heart aching for the young man. He assured him that they would do everything they could. The son brought the case to the coalition, and they quickly mobilized. They reviewed the details, gathered evidence, and reached out to the police department. The chief, to his credit, took the matter seriously and launched an internal investigation. The officer involved was reprimanded, and the department issued a public apology. It was a small victory, but it meant the world to the young man, and to the coalition. The son realized that this was what it was all about. It wasn't just about big, sweeping changes, it was about the small, everyday victories that made a difference in people's lives. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. It was about showing people that they mattered. As the coalition continued its work, the son began to see a shift in the community. People who had once felt powerless now felt empowered. They were speaking up, standing together, and demanding change. The son knew there was still a long way to go, but he also knew they were on the right path. One evening, as he stood outside the community center after a meeting, the son took a moment to reflect. He thought about everything they had accomplished and everything that still needed to be done. He thought about his mother, her quiet strength and unwavering support. And he thought about the community, their resilience and determination. He felt a surge of hope. They were making a difference, one step at a time. And as long as they kept fighting, kept standing together, they would create a better future, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. The Community Accountability Initiative was gaining momentum, but the road ahead was far from smooth. The son and his mother, along with their coalition, had made significant strides, but they knew that real change required persistence. The police department's reforms were a step in the right direction, but old habits and biases didn't disappear overnight. The coalition's work was about to face its biggest test yet. One afternoon, the son received a call from a close friend in the coalition. His voice was urgent. "You need to come to the station right now," he said. "There's been an incident." The son's heart sank. He grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door, his mind racing with possibilities. When he arrived at the police station, he found a small crowd gathered outside. At the center of it all was a teenage boy, no older than 16, sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. His mother stood beside him, her face a mix of anger and fear. The son approached them cautiously, introducing himself and asking what had happened. The boy's mother explained through tears that her son had been walking home from school when he was stopped by two officers. They accused him of matching the description of a suspect in a recent robbery. The boy, terrified and confused, had tried to explain that he had nothing to do with it, but the officers didn't listen. They handcuffed him, searched him roughly, and brought him to the station. It wasn't until they realized they had the wrong person that they let him go, but not before humiliating him in front of his friends and neighbors. The son listened, his jaw tightening with anger. He knelt down beside the boy and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," he said gently. "But we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. You have my word." The boy looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Why did they do that to me?" he asked quietly. "I didn't do anything wrong." The son sighed, his heart breaking for the young man. "Sometimes, people make mistakes," he said. "But sometimes, it's more than that. Sometimes, it's about prejudice, about seeing someone a certain way because of how they look. And that's not okay. That's why we're fighting, to make sure no one else has to go through what you did." The boy nodded, though he still looked shaken. His mother thanked the son for his support, and he promised to take the matter to the coalition. As he walked away, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why they were doing this, not just for his mother, not just for the community, but for young people like this boy who deserved to grow up feeling safe and respected. The coalition held an emergency meeting that evening. The son recounted the incident, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The room was silent as he spoke, the weight of the situation settling over everyone. When he finished, the lawyer spoke up. "This is exactly why we can't let up," he said. We've made progress, but there's still so much work to be done. The coalition decided to take immediate action. They drafted a formal complaint and demanded a meeting with the police chief. They also reached out to local media, ensuring that the incident wouldn't be swept under the rug. The Sun knew that this was a critical moment, a chance to show that they wouldn't back down, no matter how difficult the fight. The meeting with the police chief took place the next day. The atmosphere was tense as the coalition members laid out their concerns. The chief listened carefully, his expression grave. When they finished, he sighed and leaned forward in his chair. "I understand your frustration," he said. "And I share it. What happened to that young man is unacceptable. But I want you to know that we're doing everything we can to address these issues." The Sun wasn't satisfied with just words. "With all due respect, Chief," he said, "we need more than promises. We need action. We need to see that these reforms are making a difference. And right now, it doesn't feel like they are." The chief nodded, acknowledging the Sun's point. "You're right," he said. "And I take full responsibility for that. But I also need your help. Change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in a vacuum. We need to work together, law enforcement and the community, to make this work." The Sun considered this. He knew the chief was right, real change required collaboration. But he also knew that trust had to be earned. "We're willing to work with you," he said. "But we need to see concrete steps. We need transparency, accountability, and a commitment to doing better." The chief agreed, and they spent the next hour discussing specific actions the department could take. They agreed to implement body cameras for all officers, increase community patrols, and establish a mentorship program pairing officers with young people in the community. The Sun felt cautiously optimistic. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. As the coalition left the meeting, the Sun felt a mix of emotions. He was proud of what they had accomplished, but he also knew the road ahead would be challenging. He turned to his mother, who had been quietly observing the meeting. "What do you think?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I think you're doing the right thing," she said. "It's not easy, but it's important. And I'm proud of you." Her words meant the world to him. He knew he couldn't have done any of this without her support. Together, they had started something powerful, a movement that was bigger than any one person. Over the next few weeks, the coalition worked tirelessly to hold the police department accountable. They monitored the implementation of the new measures, organized community forums, and continued to advocate for change. The Sun made it a point to check in with the teenage boy and his family, ensuring they had the support they needed. The boy, though still shaken, began to heal, thanks to the coalition's efforts. But the fight was far from over. The Sun knew that there would be more challenges, more setbacks. But he also knew that they were making a difference. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. And as long as they kept fighting, kept standing together, they would create a better future for their community. The coalition's efforts were beginning to show results, but the Sun knew that lasting change required more than just holding the police accountable. It required building bridges between law enforcement and the community, fostering understanding and trust on both sides. This was easier said than done, but the Sun was determined to try. One of the key initiatives the coalition had pushed for was a mentorship program that paired police officers with young people in the community. The idea was to create opportunities for positive interactions, breaking down stereotypes and building mutual respect. The program had been met with skepticism from some officers and community members alike, but the Sun believed it was worth a shot. The program officially launched on a sunny Saturday morning. The Sun stood at the front of the community center, addressing a room filled with officers and teenagers. "This is about more than just a program," he said. "It's about creating a dialogue, about understanding each other as people. We all want the same thing, a safe, thriving community. And that starts with us." The room was quiet as he spoke, the weight of his words sinking in. The officers and teenagers were paired up, and the first activity was a simple icebreaker, sharing something about themselves that others might not know. At first, the interactions were awkward, but as the morning went on, the tension began to ease. Laughter filled the room, and for the first time, it felt like progress. The son watched from the sidelines, a small smile on his face. He knew this was just the beginning, but it was a start. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, approached him. "I have to admit," the officer said, "I wasn't sure about this. But seeing these kids, it reminds me why I became a cop in the first place. To protect and serve. Not just some people, but everyone." The son nodded, appreciating the officer's honesty. "That's what this is all about," he said. "We're all in this together. And if we can find common ground, we can make a real difference." The mentorship program wasn't the only initiative the coalition was working on. They had also organized a series of community forums, where residents could voice their concerns and suggestions directly to law enforcement. The first forum took place that evening, and the turnout was overwhelming. The community center was packed, with people of all ages and backgrounds coming together to share their experiences. The son opened the forum with a few words, thanking everyone for being there and emphasizing the importance of open dialogue. "This is your chance to be heard," he said. "To share your stories, your concerns, and your ideas. And it's our chance to listen, to learn, and to work together." One by one, people stepped up to the microphone. Some shared painful stories of being mistreated or misunderstood. Others offered suggestions for how the police could better serve the community. The officers in attendance listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. It wasn't always easy, there were moments of tension and frustration, but the son was proud of how everyone handled it. One of the most powerful moments came when an elderly woman, a longtime resident of the community, took the microphone. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her words were clear and strong. "I've lived here my whole life," she said. "I've seen this community at its best and its worst. And I know that change is possible. But it starts with us. It starts with listening, with understanding, with caring about each other." The room erupted in applause, and the son felt a lump in his throat. He looked around at the faces in the crowd, people of all ages, races, and backgrounds, and felt a surge of hope. This was what it was all about. This was why they were fighting. As the forum came to an end, the son took the microphone one last time. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for being here, for sharing your stories, for believing in the possibility of change. This is just the beginning, but together, we can create a community where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." The crowd rose to their feet, their applause filling the room. The son felt a sense of accomplishment, but he also knew that the work was far from over. There would be more challenges, more setbacks, but he was ready to face them. He had seen what was possible when people came together, and he wasn't going to stop until they achieved the change they deserved. The mentorship program and community forums were making a difference, but the son knew that real change required more than just dialogue. It required action, concrete steps that would address the root causes of the issues they were fighting against. The coalition had been working tirelessly to push for systemic reforms, and their efforts were about to face a critical test. One evening, the son received a call from the lawyer. His voice was urgent. "We've got a chance to make a real impact," he said. "There's a city council meeting next week, and they're going to be voting on a proposal to allocate funding for community policing initiatives. This is our opportunity to push for the changes we've been advocating for." The son's heart raced. This was the moment they had been working toward. If they could convince the city council to allocate funding for body cameras, de-escalation training, and community outreach programs, it would be a major step forward. But he also knew it wouldn't be easy. There were powerful voices on the council who were resistant to change, and they would need to make a compelling case. The coalition sprang into action. They spent the next few days preparing their presentation, gathering data, and rallying support. The Sun worked closely with the lawyer and community leaders, crafting a message that was both powerful and persuasive. They knew they had to appeal not just to the council's sense of justice, but also to their practical concerns, showing how these reforms would benefit the entire community. The day of the city council meeting arrived, and the Sun felt a mix of nerves and determination. He stood at the front of the council chamber, flanked by his mother, the lawyer, and several community leaders. The room was packed with supporters, their presence a silent but powerful reminder of the coalition's strength. The Sun stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today," he began. "We're here because we believe in the possibility of a better future, a future where everyone in our community feels safe, respected, and valued. But that future won't happen on its own. It requires action, and it requires investment." He went on to outline their proposals, using data and personal stories to make their case. He talked about the impact of racial profiling, the importance of transparency, and the need for trust between law enforcement and the community. He shared his mother's story, not to elicit sympathy, but to illustrate the human cost of inaction. "This isn't just about my mother," he said. "It's about all of us. It's about the young man who was stopped and humiliated for no reason. It's about the families who live in fear of being targeted. It's about the officers who want to do their jobs with integrity and respect. We have a chance to make a real difference, and we can't afford to let it pass us by." The room was silent as he finished, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The council members listened intently, some nodding in agreement, others looking thoughtful. When it came time for questions, the Sun and his team answered them confidently, addressing concerns and reinforcing their points. After what felt like an eternity, the council began their deliberations. The Sun sat with his mother, their hands clasped tightly. He could feel the tension in the room, the collective hope and fear of everyone who had fought so hard for this moment. Finally, the council president stood to announce the decision. After careful consideration, he said, "We have decided to allocate funding for the proposed community policing initiatives. This includes body cameras for all officers, de-escalation training, and expanded community outreach programs." The room erupted in applause, the sound of hope and victory filling the air. The Sun felt a surge of emotion, relief, pride, and gratitude. He turned to his mother, who had tears in her eyes, and hugged her tightly. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "We really did it." But even as they celebrated, the Sun knew that this was just the beginning. The funding was a crucial step, but it was only the first of many. They would need to monitor the implementation, hold the police department accountable, and continue to push for further reforms. The fight was far from over, but they had proven that change was possible. As they left the council chamber, the Sun felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had taken a stand, and they had won. But more importantly, they had shown the power of community, of perseverance, and of hope. And as long as they kept fighting, kept standing together, they would create a better future for everyone.